liftoff of Falcon 9.
At a live image of the Falcon 9 rocket on the SpaceX launch pad in Cape Canaveral, Florida, counting down to liftoff in just 16 minutes from now. Good evening from Hawthorne, California, and welcome to the live webcast of today's Falcon 9 mission to the International Space Station carrying the Dragon spacecraft. I'm Tom Perderio. I'm a firmware engineer here at SpaceX, and today's mission to resupply the space station represents SpaceX's 8th cargo mission to the International Space Station underneath the Commercial Resupply Services program, or CRS for short. Now, we fly CRS missions under contract with NASA in order to make sure the International Space Station has all the supplies and equipment necessary in order to accomplish its scientific goals. On board today's mission are 4,900 pounds of cargo, including crew supplies and some super cool research that we'll talk about more later in the program. In addition, we'll also be attempting to land our first stage of the Falcon 9 back on land. And this is the first time we'll be attempting a land landing since a successful landing during the Orbcomm mission in December of last year. So we're pretty excited. We have a lot of great stuff coming up tonight. Let's do this.
Hi, my name is Lauren Lyons, and I'm a mission integration engineer here at SpaceX. Now, to my right, you can see the Falcon 9 standing on the pad with Dragon at the very top. Now, this is the 7th launch that we had this year, and in the 6 previous missions, 5 of them have been fairing missions, which means there's been a satellite at the very top with a fairing on top, which is why this looks a little bit different. Overall, the entire stack of this assembly is about 5 meters shorter. And of course, you have Dragon on top. So the conical portion here, that is the Dragon capsule. It is the pressurized part of Dragon where we load the most sensitive cargo that needs steady monitoring of the environmental control systems such as humidity, temperature, and pressure. Right underneath it, we have the Dragon trunk, which is where we store our unpressurized cargo, the less sensitive stuff. It also is what envelops the solar panels, which then deploy on orbit. Now, below Dragon, everything is the Falcon 9, and it's the standard rocket, everything that you see, the same rocket that you see for our fairing missions. You have the second stage, which is right underneath Dragon, and this operates in the vacuum of space, propelling Dragon up to the International Space Station with a single Merlin engine at the very bottom. Underneath the second stage is the first stage. It's our booster, and that's the part of the vehicle which at T0, the 9 Merlin engines on the very bottom ignite and lift the whole assembly up before it then separates from the second stage, then flying back down to land. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to tell you more about that as it's happening. Today's launch window is instantaneous. Now, what that means, instead of, in these past missions we've been seeing, these fairing missions where we have maybe about 2 hours where we can launch anywhere in between those 2 hours, today we have an instantaneous window, which means we need to launch at 12:45 a.m. local time. The reason for this is the International Space Station is a moving target flying over the Earth, and we need to inject Dragon right underneath it. The reason we want to do it right then is because that minimizes the amount of extra burns that the spacecraft needs to do and makes the mission overall more efficient. Now, below here, you're going to see our mission timeline and where all of the major events that are going on this mission will be tracked, and we'll talk you through them as they come up.
Happy Sunday night from the headquarters here in Hawthorne, California. Brian here again, happy to be back on the factory floor. Now, today's cargo Dragon mission will be bringing up a ton of cool payloads to those astronauts that are orbiting in space on board the International Space Station. Now, we'll be bringing up all the usual things that cargo Dragon missions do to them, food, spacesuit, etc. But we're also going to be bringing up some cool mechanisms and science payloads. Now, one of the most primary of these is IDA, or the International Docking Adapter. Now remember, the space station is an international effort, so you have visiting spacecraft coming from all different countries with all different designs. IDA provides a common interface so that they can all mate safely and similarly in a consistent manner. Regarding the science payloads, there are many. A few of these include a biomolecular sequencer. Now, we do DNA sequencing on the ground to identify different organisms, be they small microbes or much larger organisms. Now, we've done DNA sequencing on Earth, but never out in space before. This will help us in the quest to identify plants on other planets, medicine, food, maybe even extraterrestrial life forms as well. Regarding science payloads on board today's CRS-9 mission, the next two regard health. The first is osteomics. As the route implies, this is going to be studying bones out in space. Now, in the same vein, no pun intended, heart cells will be going up with that one as well. Now, out in the microgravity environment, we have to resist, even in our idle state, much less against the force of gravity, so our bones deteriorate and our muscles atrophy much more quickly. The study of these mechanisms out in space as they compare to the health research done on Earth is a very important thing as we attempt to spend longer and longer durations out in space. Those are a few examples of the payloads on board, with many more.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Federspiel, a lead mechanical engineer here at SpaceX, and as you know, we are launching Dragon for our 9th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the International Space Station. Now, I have been following today's countdown, and the good news right now is all stations are go, and the team right here in Hawthorne, as well as our team at the Launch and Landing Control Center in Cape Canaveral, are working no issues at the moment. Right now, we are finishing up loading the propellants on our first and second stage vehicles. And as of this moment, we are completely full of the RP1, our refined kerosene, on both the first and second stage. And we are about half full loading the liquid oxygen on our second stage and just topping off the liquid oxygen loading on our first stage. Now, this entire loading process is loading about 1.1 million pounds of propellant on both the first and second stage, and we do that entire effort in just under 30 minutes. Now, when that vehicle is fully filled on the pad, the propellants will represent just over 90% of the overall vehicle's mass that's taking Dragon to orbit today. And speaking of Dragon, that vehicle weighing over 20,000 pounds, to give you a sense of scales for what we're trying to do here, is all go as well. We finished loading the final cargo into that vehicle about a day ago. Those are the time-critical experiments for the National Space Station. Everything there checked out okay. And the next major mission or event coming up for the Dragon team is at the T-minus 8-minute mark, about a minute and a half from now, when that vehicle is going to transition to internal power. The team right now is just monitoring the final few checks as Dragon prepares to go to internal power. Meanwhile, as you know, we're launching from the Eastern Range with the Air Force, the 45th Space Wing supporting us. They've given us the go for today's launch. We are also working no constraints for today's launch window. So to recap, both Falcon 9, Dragon, the range, and weather are go for today's instantaneous launch window at 9:45 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Now, the life of every single Dragon vehicle that we build is an entire book, but the first chapter is always the same. It's the manufacturing of the vehicle itself. It starts off in pieces, just like a puzzle, where the individual components are tested to make sure that they work, and then they're assembled in what we call the integration phase of the entire campaign. That occurs in the clean room, that large glass structure that you see just behind me. Now, that integration and testing campaign lasts for a few months. Once all the subsystems are verified that their behavior is nominal, we ship the vehicle out to the Cape, where it performs final checkouts, concludes its late loading, as Lauren and Japhet just mentioned, and then launches up to space, which you're about to see for CRS-9 today. Now, the goal for each of these commercial resupply missions is to deliver cargo to the International Space Station and then return some pressurized cargo home. Now, Dragon is currently the only vehicle that is equipped to do this. After these few cargo missions under our belt, Dragon 2, Crew Dragon, is next.
Now, today's Dragon mission is sending cargo to the International Space Station, but in the future, we'll be sending crew. And we're already making steady progress on our ability to upgrade the Dragon capsule in order to carry astronauts. Now, aside from things like seats and environmental control systems, safety is really critical to those upgrades. One of the most significant of those upgrades is the implementation of the launch escape system. In the event of emergency on the pad or during launch, those Super Draco engines will power up and propel Falcon 9 far away, or propel Dragon far away from Falcon 9 and back down to safety. Now, those Super Dracos aren't just for safety, but they also help us to enable propulsive land landings here on Earth, or in the future, Mars. Over the past year, we performed multiple successful tests of the Dragon propulsion system, and there are two primary ones. The first of which is the hover test. For this test, we suspended Dragon with a tether about 10 feet above the ground, and then fired those Super Draco engines in order to hover the capsule up. As the engines were firing, the onboard sensors fed data into the control system, allowing the Super Dracos to adjust their position and orientation across all 6 degrees of freedom, forward and backwards, upwards and downwards, and left and right. Now, as you can imagine, stable and precise landing is critical for humans. Now, the second major test we performed is the hold down test. Instead of suspending 10 feet above the ground, we actually held Dragon down about 2 feet above the ground. We fired the Super Draco engines in order to characterize the effects of engine plumes on the underside of Dragon. Because the vehicle is so close to the ground, the underside sees major amounts of heating and forces from acoustic reflections. And this is what Dragon's going to see when it's landing. In fact, this is the maximum dynamic environment that Crew Dragon is going to see across the entire mission. Now, all of this is gearing up to our 2017 Crew Dragon demo flight, where you'll see the capsule in action for the first time, not on a test stand, but instead on the very top of Falcon 9. Both of these tests are successful, and we're continuing to move forward towards development with confidence.
We're just about 6 minutes inside today's count, and everything still remains go for today's mission of delivering Dragon to the International Space Station for its 9th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Now the Falcon 9 launch vehicle is continuing its propellant load. We are just finishing up our liquid oxygen load on that second stage, and that's going to continue to load right up to about the T-minus 2 minute mark, where we will finish off that loading for the final few minutes of ascent. Now, something you're going to see on your screen right here is we began the engine chill of our launch vehicle at the T-minus 7 minute mark. If you've watched our previous webcasts, you've noticed that we begin the engine chill at the T-minus 10 minute mark for previous Falcon 9 launch vehicles, but experience has shown us that we don't need those extra 3 minutes, so we decided to bring this event in. Engine chill is the process where we begin flowing the cold liquid oxygen through our Merlin engines, basically chills down all those metallic components and makes sure that at the point of ignition, that liquid oxygen doesn't flash into gaseous oxygen, potentially damaging those components. And that's why we go through that whole exhaustive process of chilling them in. We've also just started transitioning the vehicle to internal power. We basically switched the vehicle over to the internal power bus, and then at the T-minus 2 minute mark, we're actually going to stop trickle charging the batteries, and then it will be on its own power at that point in time as well. Dragon, meanwhile, also transitioned to internal power, which I mentioned. That went well. No issues to report there as well. Coming up on the vehicle, we have just started pressing up the vehicle with our ground side helium. That process is going well, and that gets ready for the final few moments of strong back retract. You'll see that in a few moments here. The forward arms of the strong back, that's to the left side of the rocket, will open up, moving away and then getting ready for the vehicle's final few moments there. If there are any few issues coming up in the last few moments here, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday at midnight, but for right now, Falcon, Dragon, range, weather, everything is go at our Launch and Landing Control Center in Cape Canaveral, as well as right here in Hawthorne, California.
Now, in just a few minutes, the Falcon 9 first stage is going to lift off and carry the second stage and the Dragon capsule into low Earth orbit. Once it drops those two off, it's going to separate, and then the first stage will make its way back down into the atmosphere for a landing attempt. Now, tonight's landing attempt is at Landing Zone 1, or LZ1. This is our purpose-built rocket landing pad back at the launch site at Cape Canaveral Air Force Base in Florida. Now, for those of you who've been watching our past few launches, this is a little bit different. The past few launches, we've been landing on our autonomous spaceport drone ship, which is typically stationed about 100 miles off the coast of Florida. Going forward, we're going to be making a decision about whether to land on LZ1 or on the autonomous spaceport drone ship, depending on the type of mission that we're trying to accomplish that day. So, for instance, for our geostationary missions, like our last few missions, we need to squeeze every last bit of performance out of that Falcon 9 first stage as we can. And this doesn't leave us with a whole lot of propellant margin left over to boost the first stage back to the landing site. So what we do is we take the autonomous spaceport drone ship and position it out in the ocean so that it can catch the rocket as it controls its way down through the atmosphere. However, today, during a LEO mission to the International Space Station, we actually have a fair bit of propellant margin left over. It means that we can safely boost the Falcon 9 first stage all the way back to Cape Canaveral for a safe and controlled landing on LZ1. Now, for those of you who are familiar, there's three different maneuvers. There's a boost back burn, a re-entry burn, and then a landing burn, which you'll hopefully be able to see on camera. And our first stage is just about to take off in a few minutes here. So let's turn it over to the pad cameras and watch the rocket take off.
Stage 2 lock secured for flight. Falcon 9 is on internal power. M1D TC ground supply at full pressure. Vehicles in self-line. Stage 1 and Stage 2 cryo helium secured for flight.
VC and DC on countdown. Verify F9 and Dragon are in startup.
Falcon 9's in startup.
Dragon is in startup.
Stage 1, Stage 2 present for flight.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds.
Falcon 9's configured for flight.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff of the Falcon 9. Falcon 9 is cleared the towers. GC move to section 10.57.
Stage
Secure the
1
pad.
propulsion's nominal.
Pad net A.
Avionics, telemetry, and power report.
And Falcon 9 is on its way to delivering Dragon to the International Space Station for its 9th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Coming up, we have max Q, about another second or so. It's one of the highest stress states in the vehicle. Shortly after this, in about another minute, we will have main engine cutoff. This first stage burn will last for till the 2-minute and 20-second mark.
Stage 1 propulsion's nominal.
After that point in time, we will be deploying the booster. You just heard the propulsion call out that propulsion is nominal right now. And we've begun chilling in our Merlin vacuum engines on the second stage, getting ready for ignition right after separation. Now, because we are landing back at landing zone 1, you will see the stage 1, you may not see this, but the stage 1 will be doing a quick flip maneuver right after separation, head right back. And then shortly after we have the second engine start, the Dragon nose cone will be separating and deployed as we leave the atmosphere of the Earth. Engine shut off. And stage separation.
Stage separation.
Stage 1 is entered its split.
And we have ignition of the second stage engine.
Stage 1 boost back is starting.
And the boost back burn for stage 1 has also begun.
Stage 2 propulsion is nominal.
Boost back burn is continuing as planned for the first stage. second stage looks like a nominal throttling as well.
Okay, we just got confirmation that that boost back burn has engaged, so that is really great news, and the first stage is now on its way back to land. The second stage, however, is continuing on up with Dragon on top.
Right, and the next milestone for Dragon is it's going to deploy that nose cone that sits at the very front of itself. Remember, once we're out in space, we don't need that aerodynamic shield anymore.
And so the Dragon spacecraft is then going to separate from the second stage and then prepare to maneuver towards the International Space Station. Now, this isn't just a straight line maneuver. There's actually baby step maneuvers to get as close to the International Space Station as possible without endangering it.
Yes, these very short propulsive thrusts. These stop and go, stop and goes.
Yeah, you can actually see it looks we're really catching up with the International Space Station as it's going around the Earth. You can see in the animation here, the first stage takes off and then separates with the second stage. And the second stage with the Dragon on it is trying to catch up with the orbital parameters of the International Space Station.
Right, and so the animation on screen to show it's deployed, Dragon is on its own now, and then it's going to perform those co-elliptic burns and those height adjusts. It just does one there, but it does a sequence of these in its actual phasing. And then it approaches the ISS from underneath. It's called the nadir pointing direction, at which point it gets grappled and birthed.
So this is all coming up shortly after we separate from the second stage. Second stage burn is still going nominally right now. You can see it on your screen. Those white hot exhaust gases coming out of the engine bell. And then while this is all happening, the first stage is boosting its way back towards land.
Yeah, we're going to continue to bring you updates as we hear about the next burn that happens. But in the meantime, let's keep talking about Dragon, huh?
And so, yeah, once it gets to the station itself, it will get grappled, and then that canadarm, that's the mechanism that does it, will pull the Dragon spacecraft in, at which point we say that we're berthed. That's when the common berthing mechanism, active on the ISS side, passive on the Dragon side, it gets opened up, and the astronauts can take advantage of all that cargo that got sent up.
So we're getting pretty close to some burn maneuvers for the first stage. Let's take it back up to JFED and see what's going on with the first stage.
So we are just over 5 minutes into today's mission, and so far everything is proceeding nominally, as we like to say around here at SpaceX. That second stage engine you see on the right side of your screen, putting out just about 210,000 pounds of thrust right now. It's doing its job splendidly. It is going to be burning for about another 4 minutes right now, cutting off around the 9-minute mark. They will be putting Dragon into an orbit of about 200 kilometers by 360 kilometers. Everything there looks like it's going well. Meanwhile, the first stage, you heard the crowd cheer and call-outs for the boost back burn. That did perform successfully. Looking at the track, the rocket is going exactly as we want it right now. Coming up in about 30 seconds right now, we're going to have the entry burn. That boost back burn, basically what it does is it negates all that forward velocity and puts us on a trajectory back at landing zone 1. The entry burn is really there to slow the vehicle down as it comes through the atmosphere. The atmosphere can be very damaging to the first stage, and so we basically want to slow it down as it comes into the atmosphere. We were going over 5,000 kilometers an hour, and the stage reached an apogee of over 130 kilometers, so that's a lot of energy we have to take out. That entry burn is starting just now. It looks like it sounds pretty good. We are coming in through the atmosphere as of this moment. This entry burn will last for about 21 more seconds. You're seeing the image from the aft end of the rocket there. This burn will cut off in about 5 seconds, and we have shutdown. And it looks like a good shutdown of the entry burn. Now coming up, we have the landing burn beginning in about 45 seconds or so from now. These times could vary a little bit. It's followed by touchdown and landing zone 1. But right now, both on orbit and the first stage seem like they're in a good shape right now for today's mission.
So as you just heard from JFED, the re-entry burn of this first stage looks like it was successful. We're just waiting for that landing burn, that final burn. Hopefully we'll be able to see a pad shot, and we'll get a good look at the landing burn as it comes in for a landing.
Yeah, people here, as you can see, are very quiet and waiting with bated breath because this is huge. Everyone is really, really excited. The first time coming back to land since the Orbcom mission back in December of last year. And as Tom just mentioned, we have those cameras out at landing zone 1, as you can see right here. And this is where we're going to see the Falcon 9 return.
You should see the re-entry burn. Landing will start here soon. We can't promise it, but the footage should be better than on the drone ship because the video cameras are a little bit further away. You can see the vehicle's plumes coming into frame now. That's Falcon 9 going to return at landing zone 1.
That means we had a successful boost back burn, a successful re-entry burn, and then now a successful landing burn, as we all just got to see on camera.
This is a very different problem than landing back at the drone ship, too. It opens up a whole slew of different trajectories. And so recovering a first stage back at LZ1 is yet another milestone to give us a ton of information as we move forward.
Now, it's important to remember the primary mission today is still to get the Dragon to the International Space Station. That sounds like it's going pretty well right now. We're just waiting for the successful confirmation of orbit from the Dragon. So that Dragon spacecraft is going to still be heading towards the ISS. We're going to have a separation maneuver sometime soon here. And then after that is going to be a solar array deploy. That's when the big solar array panels pop up beside the Dragon.
Separating from second stage to continue on its mission, moving forward to the space station by itself. Godspeed, Dragon.
This is a view from the top of the second stage of the rocket, looking up at the Dragon as it glides away. We just had a successful separation maneuver. In just a few seconds here, we should see the solar array covers on either side of the Dragon pop off, and then the Dragon can start harvesting solar power.
Right, and remember, with the excitement of that first stage landing back at LZ1 behind us, this primary mission continues. A few events are coming up now. The propulsion system is going to prime, and a few other sensor suite actions that JFED will talk about as Dragon continues on its own to phase up to the International Space Station.
Things are going well in orbit right now. Dragon is in its good orbit right now. Prop priming is going on right now, and in about 15 seconds or so, we'll see the solar rays pop off of Dragon. That should happen in a few moments. Everything so far is looking good. Just seeing what their Dragon mission director and team right now are reporting that vehicle is healthy in orbit, and everything there is expected. And meanwhile, as you saw, the first stage performed beautifully. We've landed back at landing zone 1 as we'd hope. For this entire mission. You're looking at a view right now at the aft end of the second stage. That did place Dragon into its perfect orbit. And meanwhile, on the right side of your screen there, now we've changed views to the solar array fairings themselves. That's actually a camera inside the solar array fairings. In a moment here, you actually see Dragon's solar rays pop open. Those solar rays are behind the fairings to protect them from the intense launch environments that we have during ascent. And then once we get to orbit, we use some pyrotechnic bolts and eject them using some springs, the solar rays, so we can begin our on-orbit operations and really start the overall mission for Dragon. Once we have the solar rays out, we can start beginning our power generation. Dragon does have 4 batteries on board. Unfortunately, those 4 batteries cannot last the entire duration of the mission, which is why we have the solar rays to act as power generation capability for us. And then we will begin our on-orbit operations. And as Brian mentioned, at about T+3 hours for this mission, we're going to open the GNC beta doors and begin guidance and navigation on-orbit maneuvers. And those solar rays look like they're coming out right there. It's always exciting to see those unfurl. Kind of towards the left-hand side, about a third of the way up in the middle, that's where the spring is. And you can see the wire harnesses in the back of the solar array there snake around. And it looks at this moment like we have a successful deployment. Those will continue to unfold for about another 5 seconds or so before they fully rigidize. And then towards the bottom of your screen, those solar rays themselves will rotate about that axis as we begin our on-orbit pointing on the space station, as we go towards the space station. Today's docking attempt, our berthing attempt rather, won't actually be today. It's coming up on the 10th, on Tuesday. We will be doing a number of the burns, height, altitude, and co-Olympic adjusts that you heard earlier talk about. Those will be going on over the next few days. But for now, everything looks like it's good on orbit, and Dragon is in a safe, intended orbit on its way to the International Space Station for just a few more days till we get there.
With successful solar array deployment behind us, thank you for the update, JFed. That brings the webcast to a conclusion. A quick recap. We had a nominal pre-launch countdown, a successful liftoff of the Falcon 9 with second stage and Dragon, and then a successful recovery with the first stage coming back to land at LZ-1. A great accomplishment, not just for SpaceX, but for people in general, for the mission to make rapid reusability a real thing. Now, as we continue to make those phasing maneuvers that we spoke of earlier, in the next 24 hours, you may stay up to date with those on the SpaceX website until we get to the ISS in about 24 hours, and those astronauts can take advantage of that cargo.
So like Brian was saying, this concludes the SpaceX webcast. We'd like to thank our customer, NASA. We'd like to thank the Air Force and Range and the FAA. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in.
And you can follow us on our social media pages on Facebook and on Twitter, and at SpaceX, actually, and even on Instagram, where we're loading pictures. Wait, I'm sorry. What?
Is that a dragon?
What
Wait.
the? Oh, yeah, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it.
That was money.